Who are Palestinians? What does it mean to be Palestinian? Where do Palestinians come from? To answer these questions accurately, we have to first understand what is Palestine. And given Palestine's millennia-long history, this is no easy question. The history of Palestine is also complicated by colonial conceptions of Palestine that were repeated until they were mistaken for facts. But Palestine has its own story to reclaim. Palestine is and has long been a country. The name Palestine has described land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River since the 13th century BCE. As historian Nur Maslaha documents in his book, Palestine, A 4,000-Year History, various empires have controlled Palestine during its long history, including the Romans, the Byzantine Christian Empire, and several Islamic empires. And despite the various names given to the region, Palestine prevailed. By the time the Ottoman Empire expanded its control to Palestine in the 16th century, Palestine began to flourish as a multi-ethnic community, and although a majority of Palestinians were Muslim, Palestinian Christians and Jews lived together on shared land. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century, European colonial powers dominated Palestine and referred to it as the British Mandate of Palestine, or Mandatory Palestine. The British ultimately promised Palestinians the end of colonial rule and the right to self-determination, but this ultimately proved to be a disingenuous promise. At the turn of the 19th century, the first European Zionism conference was held to discuss Zionist nationalism. From this emerged a form of political Zionism which advocated for the migration of European Jews to Palestine with the intention of establishing a Jewish state at the expense of the existing indigenous Palestinian population. This endeavor was publicly supported by the British Empire in a Zionist statement in 1917 known as the Balfour Declaration. European Christians and Jewish Zionists in the 19th and early 20th century were fully aware of an existing Arab population in Palestine, but they continued to perpetuate what would become a popular Zionist myth, that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. With European imperial support, the Zionist movement violently established the State of Israel in 1948 over historic Palestine. Palestinians today refer to this event as a Nakba, or the catastrophe. More than 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their lands, and over 400 Palestinian villages were destroyed to form the Zionist State of Israel. Palestinian society became fragmented. Some Palestinians were internally displaced and continue to this day to live in refugee camps within their own homeland. Other Palestinians fled to neighboring countries where they live today, often without citizenship or guaranteed political and civil rights. So-called peace negotiations and talks aimed at establishing Palestinian statehood have taken place over the years, but these have all proven to be smokescreens that ultimately masked and enabled Israel's occupation and continued settlement expansion projects. Palestinians living in the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, are subject to multiple layers of oppression, including by the authoritarian nature of Palestinian governing bodies, which are both a result of and exacerbated by the Israeli settler colonial project and other imperialist actors. Palestinians who live within the borders of the Israeli state today are relegated to second-class status by institutionalized discrimination practices in the Israeli legal system that subjects Palestinian Arabs, both Christian and Muslim, to laws that govern Palestinian rights differently than those of Jewish Israelis, a legal apparatus known as apartheid. The Zionist state is not shy about its discriminatory policies with respect to Palestinians. In 2018, Israel passed a law codifying its ethnocratic intentions in the so-called nation-state bill that declares that the right to exercise self-determination in the State of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. This means that a Jewish person born anywhere in the world can migrate to Israel and live on settlements built on destroyed Palestinian homes. But Palestinians who are expelled by Zionist forces are barred from returning to Palestine, despite an internationally recognized right to do so. But Palestine is just as much about its people as it is about the land, and it lives on just as much in those of us in exile. The Palestinian diaspora transcends imposed borders and boundaries, and a distinct identity has emerged. As generations of Palestinians embrace our ancestral heritage and our right to historic Palestine, which could never be severed by physical exile. Our history lives through us and shapes who we are no matter where we have ended up. And every Palestinian has a unique story to tell about who we are, how they ended up there, and how living there affects their capacity to be Palestinian. Zionism has tried, and failed, to erase Palestine by ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their homes. But no matter how far Palestinians may be from Palestine, we will always embody our connection to Palestine, whether it is through our community, our food, our music, our dance, our language and literature, or through the struggle for our right to return to our ancestral homeland. This struggle to return and to recognize Palestinian suffering at the expense of Zionism goes far beyond the contested borders of historic Palestine. The United States has been diplomatically allied with Israel's Zionist agenda and gives billions of dollars in military aid to Israel annually, more than any other country. This alliance extends beyond financial and political support. Israel and the US have a mutual interest in militarized technologies and practices, and this is reflected in both countries' installations of border walls, shared militarized policing practices, and checkpoints. This creates a complicated relationship for Palestinians living in the diaspora, and we will hear from Palestinians who live in Texas about their relationship to their identity.
Hey, well, my name is Lama Abu Hantash. I'm a first-generation Palestinian American. I was born and raised in Zachary, Louisiana.
I was born in Los Angeles. My parents got divorced when I was like 2, and so my mom and my 2 sisters and we came to Texas.
My name is Murin. I am 30 years old. I am the filmmaker and the person on the other side of the interviews. I was born in San Antonio. I was raised here pretty much. I'm Palestinian.
My name is Neda, and I was raised in Germany because my dad's in the US Air Force. I'm very proud to tell people that I am Palestinian whenever I'm speaking to them and they ask where I'm from.
My name is Kaki Kaki. I'm 27 years old. I'm a master's student at Texas A&M University. Study aerospace engineering. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. So I was born and raised there. That's pretty much everything there is to know about me.
I was actually born in Austria, Vienna, Austria. Yeah, so as most Palestinians, you kind of fluctuate from one country to another to find somewhere that accepts you, and that's what my parents did, you know. My dad had to leave, of course, Palestine in order to study, because he could not really study that time period when he was there because a lot of restrictions, limitations, so he went to Europe and studied and became a doctor there.
I was born in El Paso, and then when I was just a little tiny kid, we moved to a little city right outside of Dubai, Sharjah. And I grew up there for about 9-10 years. And then we moved back to El Paso, where my mom is from. Outside of Dubai, we could travel a lot more. So we would go there a lot. We'd go to Jordan, and then we'd go to Palestine, to our little village, Burqa. And then after we moved to America, the trips got less frequent.
My name is Rasmi Hassouna. I'm from the Gaza Strip. I came to the States in 1988. I did my master's degree in School of Mines in South Dakota.
I was born and raised in San Antonio. That is where my mom came for school from Jerusalem, and she met my dad and they got married. My day job is a software engineer. And so when I graduated, I moved to Austin. It was kind of funny because Austin's like the place where you went for field trips, you know, when I was growing up. I don't know if it's the same for you. And so then I graduated and I came to San Antonio for a little while because I didn't have any money to stay in Massachusetts. It's very expensive. And when I was looking for jobs, people were like, oh, Austin's the place to be if you're in tech. And I was like, Austin? But yeah, so that's where I mostly live. And but I'm, you know, back and forth because San Antonio's not very far, and try to help out at home and stuff like that.
I grew up not really sure what Palestine was. A lot of it was just conversations, like, from my parents and things that I would hear, like, them talking about our culture. And I heard the word Palestine. I knew it was a different place. And, I mean, I lived there. I went when I was 8 and again when I was 14, and I could see that things were different, but I still was never really sure what it meant until I was a lot older.
Tried to go to Palestine and to Jordan as much as possible. That's where most of my family is, in Jordan, because of the displacement, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my father comes from a big family, the Abu Hantash family in Kakun, which doesn't really exist anymore, actually. It was one of the ones that went away in 48. And my mother is from a village called Abu Dis, which people might know because it's actually the little village outside of Jerusalem that they're always trying to make the new capital of Palestine. Meaning the Israelis are always trying to suggest as a new capital in Palestine. So we get on the news sometimes. Also a big landfill. It's really fun. It's a cute place.
My mom's side is originally from Nazareth, and my dad's side, his dad is from Nablus, and his mom is from Ramallah. So we're from all over Palestine, but both of my parents were born in Jerusalem. Yeah, my grandfather was an orphan. So I'm not exactly sure the story. He was born in 1908, so really far back. His father died, and his mom couldn't afford to raise him and his brother, so she picked one, essentially. And so my jiddo Sama'an, my grandfather, went to an orphanage in Jerusalem. And then my teta but he's originally from Nazareth. And then my grandmother's from Nazareth, and our people like to arrange marriages. And so the mother was still involved, the teta Sama'an, and so they the families met, and then I actually think they met on the wedding day. So anyways, and then they moved to Jerusalem, and so that's how they ended up there.
Have you ever had a chance to visit Palestine?
No, and inshallah, it's I wish. All my cousins have gone back, but my mom is obviously she's a single mom, and finances are difficult, and it's just really expensive to go back. So my mom even hasn't been back since 96, I think, for her cousin's wedding. Hasn't been back since. And then my dad is very culturally American, and I don't think has a huge interest. And so I've never been back. I've been to Lebanon. I worked in 2019 with an organization learning empowerment for the advancement of Palestinians. And so we were not in a colonial way, but we were, obviously Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, they have to go through the brevet test, and it's only administered in English and French. And because of the, status of the UNRWA schools, it's one teacher in a classroom of 70. It's really hard for students to grasp information on top of just the trauma, the prolonged trauma and stress that comes with living in a refugee camp. It's just hard to grasp that information. And so the program sought to sort of fill that gap in the summer by doing English courses and then teaching arts courses. And so that's the closest I've been to Palestine, because we were in the Rashidiyya refugee camp, which is geographically the closest to Palestine. And we had the opportunity to go to the border between Palestine and Lebanon, which was really emotional, because it was the first time I'd ever seen, I'm kind of emotional right now. It's the first time I'd ever seen Palestine, ever. And it's so central both to my identity, to my studies, to my organizing, to everything. So it was holy cow, it was such an emotional experience. But so that's the first time I've ever seen it. Trying to convince my mom, I've been saving up to go to Palestine. And I'm trying to convince my mom this summer to go. So inshallah, God willing. But yeah, I've never been.
I've known that my whole life, but I've never actually gotten to see it with my own eyes. And I've known the history, and you hear about so many atrocities happening in this beautiful, beautiful country, that is my home. And so I want to solidify that, I think, by going there and just really feeling what it's like, to truly, truly be a Palestinian living in Palestine, because that's something that unfortunately a lot of us don't have the privilege of doing. Knowing our grandparents, our ancestors, have been forcibly removed from this country is just, it's important for us to, make the effort to go back and just be one with the country that we're from.
Going into Palestine is very difficult because my dad and pretty much most of his family are not allowed in because of their political affiliations with certain liberation organizations. My mother then had to get us in with her American citizenship because I have one American grandparent, my mom's mom, and so we like her entire family has American citizenship, and we were able to get in on that. Still a very laborious process where we would always be just kept at the border for like 12 hours, separated from our mother, even though we're like as young as like 6, 7.
Well, I think it was 2017, there was like BDS organizers can be kicked out. And so I guess in my head, I was like, maybe I can go through the Jisr, or the bridge, but I also, you know, there's like mukhabarat, and like, I don't know, it's definitely scary, because my name, like, as soon as I got into organizing, I became an SJP officer in January of 2019, so my first semester, and then by April 2019, my Fuad supports terrorism, whitewashes Israel, whitewashes the Great March of Return, blah, blah, blah. So it's definitely scary. And also my aunt is involved in like, she was involved in the PLO and then the PA, Hanan Ashrawi.
Hanan Ashrawi is your aunt?
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
Hayat Allah.
What on earth is going on? I just meet like the most wild Palestinian. He said casually, like, I wouldn't know who Hanan Ashrawi is. Hanan Ashrawi is not you.
Hello, yeah, Mart Khali, so yeah, my uncle's wife. So so I am a little scared.
Yeah.
And then my family generally, which I won't get too much into, has been like involved in like organizing in Palestine. I can get into this because he passed away, but my great uncle Fuad Nassar was like one of the founders of the Palestine Communist Party in Nazareth. And so yeah, my family also generally just has like a very thorough political history in Palestine. And so I already felt sort of like predisposed to like, I'm definitely going to be interrogated, like my cousins routinely are. But then now with the Canary Mission page, I'm like scared that I'm just like not even going to get in, you know?
My grandmother is from Jaffa, and then my grandfather is from Aramla. That's like on my dad's side. My mom is actually Ecuadorian. So growing up, I actually didn't know I was Palestinian. And I remember whenever I first, I was first like learning about my identity, like my Palestinian identity, I was like super ashamed to like even mention that, because I was like, that's so weird and embarrassing. Like, how did I not know I was Palestinian? But like, it's actually something really normal. Like a lot, like I've met a lot of Palestinians that have had the same story, where it's just like their family like they just didn't talk about it in the household, and so like they didn't even know they were Palestinian. I was just like, I knew I was Arab, like I knew my family was like I knew my dad grew up in Saudi, but that was like basically it.
Yes, my family's from Palestine. Whenever someone asks me, it's always funny, because I tell them I was born here, but I always have to emphasize that my family's Palestinian. I didn't want to stray away from who I was. I didn't want to forget, you know, even though I only lived there for a year, there's just something about it that you don't want to lose and forget about, you know, being Palestinian. A lot of times I get this feeling that they're saying, or that they're thinking like, oh, he's Palestinian, or, oh, he's from Israel. I think he means, you know, I've gotten that a few times. You're like, oh, I'm Palestinian. Oh, you're from Israel. No, I'm not from Israel. I'm Palestinian.
So I kind of just saw myself unhappy at school, saw myself feeling very marginalized by my own community. I went to a school where no one talked to me. Like, I wasn't really friends with anybody. I was a queer kid in this like very, very, very binary environment. So I kind of was always visible, but no one really wanted to like approach me. And I think that in and of itself, like through school and my family and everything, kind of like just really affected the way I build relationships. So I just ended up feeling very like alone in Jordan and constantly wanting to leave. I think back in Amman, whenever I would be othered, it would just be because I was just very visibly femme. And I think that leads people to react to you in a certain way. So the judgment was always very much like appearance and how I'm presenting in my community, and as much as that fucked me up. But I feel like it's different here because it feels like it's all of you.
There's a way in which displacement, like when you're like part of a diaspora, like the Palestinian diaspora, feels jarring. It feels weirdly violent to like be in a place that like kind of like the sensation wasn't built for you. And when I'm home, like when I'm in Palestine or even just like with other Palestinians, there's this kind of like like emotional bubble that we can like build for ourselves. Like I might not know you from Adam, but like I feel connected and close to you in a way that is like so holistic and so reviving and rejuvenating, like on a personal level, because it's like, oh, you know, I get this wind of energy that's like, I want to get to know you. Like I want to know more. I want to like hear all about your village. And it's a weird thing. It's hard to describe to somebody who hasn't experienced that. All I can say is that it's like we're walking around with like little puzzle pieces of Palestine, and every time you meet a Palestinian, you're just slotting it together.
I see as a Palestinian, Israeli, I don't like to call it conflict. It's you know, it's an occupation. It's, and I think people getting a lot more education about it, knowing much about it, maybe the internet and social media and these things change a lot of views and things. People can see things a while back if you didn't see it through CNN or regular TV media, it didn't exist. But now people say, hey, this is not right. So I think there is a lot of improvement. The young generations are a lot more active, especially Palestinian young generations. I see them a lot more active. Back when I came to Texas, it was, well, there were not as many as there is right now. So hopefully things are getting to the better. You know?
One of the things that I wanted to do with this film was because I remember there wasn't a lot being said about Palestinians. The stuff that I did hear, I mean, my parents put on Al Jazeera, so I got that side of things. But in American media, I heard more good things about Israel and more terrible things about Palestinians.
The most vivid memory I have of it was we were trying to go out of town. Israeli soldiers had their rocks or blockade, whatever you want to call it. They weren't letting anyone in or out, no specific reason, per usual. But you know, my mom being who she was, she said, no, I planned on doing something today, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So we got there, and you know, obviously I was very uncomfortable when someone pulls up to you with a big gun strapped to their chest, speaking to my mother. You know, you get worried about those things. Even as a kid, if you don't understand much, you understand that a gun can hurt someone. But I remember, you know, she didn't care if there was a gun strapped to his chest or whatever it may be, whatever he was wearing. She had this conviction about her that she just wanted to, you know, go do what she wanted to do. And, you know, thinking back on it now, you can be like, you know, a lot of those people in that situation don't get to have that conviction.
And I saw this post of like a Palestinian kid. He was like 15. He was from Beit Lahem, and he was arrested by Israeli soldiers. Like, this could be me if I was still there. This could be my cousins at any moment. This could. I mean, when I tell you, I was wearing my kufiya to school every day. Like actually wearing my kufiya to school every day, and having some really racist encounters with my teachers and like really awful shit. Like it was so bad.
Not too long ago, I had met someone. I was on an internship, and he asked me what I do, and I told him I'm an aerospace engineer. And then we got to talking, and then somehow, I don't know, the military was brought up, and I was like, oh yeah, but I already told them, like, I don't work with weapons, you know, and I'm employed now, and I told them, like, I don't work with weapons, I don't do military stuff, you know, and it's just not something I want in my life at all.
You know, the struggle to find a job first, and the accent, the looks, the combination. People wanted to work with people look like them, I guess. I was hired back then at $24,000 a year, which is almost half what people with my qualification. What basically improved my situation after There is a professional engineering license with the state of Texas. I took the test and passed it in 97, which was a lot of, for some reason, my boss and other people at the office were very surprised that I took the test and passed it the first time. To them, it's like, almost, this is impossible. People take it 2, 3, 4. My boss want to put me in contact with somebody who took the test 7 times because he's very familiar with the test and he never passed it yet back then. And I went and passed the test and he was very surprised that I passed the test.
We grew up in the time when 9/11 happened and we were in grade school. Everyone would just throw around the word terrorist and, you didn't really understand if those were Muslims who were doing something bad or if they were just poorly representing or if they weren't even Muslim at all, And, as you get older and you actually understand that, all those people who were calling me terrorists, they were just all misinformed. These people think the way they do because they hear it from somewhere, right? So it was important to see where it was coming from. And when
They use the word terrorism. That's the biggest scare tactic, right? You label someone terrorist, that's it. That justifies all actions. This justifies you bombing them, justifies you killing their children, imprisoning them, limiting their movement, preventing them from having any rights. That's all it takes.
I went through a set of traumas at an early age of my life that set me at a distance from my family. And my family at the time was the only relationship to Palestine I had. Because in Amman, I went to school where people didn't really people I hung out with were not really talking about being from Palestine and how wonderful it is. Kids talking about kid shit. I fully remember going to my mom and asking her, I'm Jordanian, right? And I was probably a fucking 8-year-old or something. And and then she reacted in a way that she reacted in. And she let me know that I'm Palestinian. And I have, not that I ever try, but I feel like if I did, I would have a very hard time of forgetting it. And so it was just okay, cool. And then for me, it was I gravitate towards friends who are from Palestine. And then I'd have conversations with my friends about Palestine, but that was it. That never, I felt because I had that distance from my family and because I had that distance from most specifically Arab men, cis het men, that just kind of made me lose interest in learning about where I'm from. And then even when we would go, whatever interactions I would have with the occupation, I was a visitor. So to me, that's the attention that I granted it. And I don't know, I think right when my mom started seeing that I write or me sharing things with her, by the time that I was 16, 17, she'd keep asking me why I never wrote about Palestine. And that question has just stayed with me for my whole life. And she also keeps reminding me of that question, why don't I write about Palestine? It's the relationship I have with Palestine is so, it's 1,000 things at the same time. I don't know how to know it as home, but whenever anybody asks me about it, I say, I am Palestinian, born and raised in Amman, Jordan. I want people to know I'm Palestinian, but then it's I don't feel like I do the work to connect to Palestine because my relationship with it is very romanticized. I feel so far I've been very able to be Palestinian in Texas, but I don't feel it stirs a ruckus in my life as much as it attracts interest. Could just be because I would say the people I hang around are people who are more on the progressive side of thinking about the world. A lot of people want to talk to you about Palestine. And how does Palestine feel for you, And do you miss it? Or it brings the interest of people immediately wanting to talk to you about Israel. And just being well, what do you think? And it's well, it's obvious. I'm Palestinian. It's even if I'm not fucking Palestinian, it's obvious. Like, you should not, like, this should not be, and people want to, like, have arguments with you. People want to, like, but, like, think about them, you know, why can't you just, like, think about the other side? And so it just gets really, I don't know, fucking frustrating. Yeah. I love how we started this being like, this doesn't really, I don't feel like it affects me in a negative way. And then I'm just like, holy shit. I just noticed. Yeah.
You know, in my mind, I think Christian Zionists somehow see Palestinians as a threat. I didn't really engage with Christian Zionism until I had moved here. You know, especially following the Trump presidency, where you had like Golan Heights and Trump Heights, and, you know, this disturbing idea of, you know, that somehow our president, the person who's supposed to represent our country, is now, you know, engaging in this like weird Christian Zionist agenda. And so I think a lot of people either go around, you know, see Palestinians as a threat to their, you know, divine plan, and some people just kind of relieve themselves of engaging with the Palestinian identity because it's just consequential.
A lot of times in Texas, like, I've seen many people who are like interested in organizing, but like they're scared. This larger sense of fear that people feel, and I think it's largely in part due to that Christian Zionism that we see. A lot of people don't really know how much Christian Zionism has contributed to the spread of Zionist propaganda in the US. It has influenced so much of what has happened in Texas, and like BDS laws here in Texas, and, you know, what is passing here in Texas.
Christian Zionism is the idea, according to folks who interpret the Bible literally, that the global Jewish population should inhabit all of Israel according to biblical prophecy in order to initiate the second coming. It's very much like manifest destiny. The idea that was used here to erase the indigenous people of Turtle Island when colonizers came and founded what became the United States. They justified it in this Christian theology as manifest destiny, the idea that God granted them this land and it should be expanded on. This is the same concept. And so that's the religious claim that people have to it, but it's not a religious, people want to make it a religious quote unquote conflict when the reality is it's absolutely not. It's a struggle against a political entity that is ethnically cleansing our homeland of us and trying to ensure that there is no such thing as a Palestinian identity. Unbeknownst to a lot of folks, San Antonio is actually home to the largest Christian Zionist lobby in the country that is called Christians United for Israel. They boast a membership of about 6 million people. It's no small movement, and it's based here out of San Antonio in a church called Cornerstone Church. And I remember walking into Cornerstone because I had run into some of their members when I was organizing on campus, and I wanted to know like what their stake in this was. I didn't understand how Christians who had never heard of Palestine probably, and knew very little about what Palestinian life actually was and what the reality of our situation was like. But I wanted to know why they felt such a strong connection to this. And so I went into the church, and when you go in, I mean, I was pretty shocked because when you walk into the church, you have on the stage the American flag on one side and the Israeli flag on the same level, right? Which is a sign of respect that they're treating both countries the same, which is something I don't see much of anywhere else.
I think it complicates things for people, right? Because they assume, you know, again, this is part of the propaganda in the United States, that it's a Jew versus Muslim issue, right? And so there's this intentional invisibilization of Arab Christians. There's this other kind of invisibilization that happens. So we see this kind of on a day-to-day basis. I think there's also, you know, to speak to some of the liberal Zionism insidiousness, in both San Antonio and in Austin, right, we have liberal Zionist mayors, right? And so it adds, like, especially as an organizer, like this weird, it's like a different layer to it, right? Because socially, there's a lot of social programs that both of these mayors do that are good for the community, right? But they're intrinsically not anti-imperialist, they're not liberatory. right? So how do you fight against that, right? Like, so I can speak more to Austin since I've organized more there, right? Our mayor, Adler, he used to belong to the ADL. He's part of the ADL, right? Which the ADL is incredibly Islamophobic, it's incredibly anti-Arab, incredibly anti-Palestinian. They've given money to put on some of these deadly exchange campaigns between the Austin Police Department and other police departments and the Zionist entity. So it's a very harmful, that's a very harmful ideology just intrinsically, right?
I think racism exists. 9/11 exposed it, maybe for a while, then it cooled off a little bit. Let me put it this way. I usually have two cars. The car I like to drive, I have a Mercedes S-Class, and I have a Jeep, Grand Cherokee. When I have a meeting with people, I drive the Jeep. If I'm going to the office and coming back and whatever, I drive a Mercedes. Till now, I see it in the eyes of people. If like I go with maybe to them flashy car or whatever, they take an issue with that or a position. You feel some kind of animosity. I don't know how to describe it, but it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, so Canary Mission is like a heavily funded but super secretive doxing website that targets pro-Palestine organizers on campus, primarily specifically like Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim organizers, and seeks to like mischaracterize and distort very just activism in support of Palestinian freedom and Palestinian human rights, and intentionally misconstrue the organizing and the people that participate in it as anti-Semitic and anti-Semites, perpetuating hate, perpetuating racism, etc. And they have, hundreds upon hundreds of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students, their name, their pictures, their university, their majors. For me, they have my aunt, like that I am the nephew of X, and they go through your Facebook profile, Twitter profile, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, and gather pictures and information, but like quotes, like tweets that you have, right? And intentionally distort them.
For all the people who are socialized in the United States who don't know any better, right? They're socialized a lot under that Christian Zionism. They're socialized in imperialism, right? They think that there's a lot of Orientalist tropes that are always out there in the media, right? Like all of our glittering civilizations that we've had for literally thousands of years are completely ignored, are twisted, and so they're not understood by people here. So when people hear the word Palestinian, they hear conflict, and I think especially stuck out to me was that innocence is a privilege. And it's like, I'm here to empower my community. That's what I think is how we're going to get change. I don't think trying to convince the colonizer that you're human is like a good way forward. There are some people I think who do care about that, but power, no one gives you power. No one gives you sovereignty. You have to claim that. And so I think that's, part of our role here, but it's so many things because it's fear, right? It's fear of losing your job, fear of, being harassed, fear of being beaten, fear of being killed, right? And I think, for me particularly, because I'm so white passing, because my family are Christian Arab, they're not Muslim Arab, like there's a different positionality that we have compared to other people. I've heard people say, like, after 9/11 happened, FBI came to my house, my parents' house, or after 9/11, my brothers were beaten up in the street. After 9/11, like all this stuff happened because we wore hijab, or I think I was able to camouflage myself a little bit more, but there's a fear there. Like there's something you have to give up to do that.
Even from organizations and people who were trying to help, I never heard our story told the way that we tell it. Even though I saw Palestinians in so many different places and there were different representatives, there was still so much that kept us from being able to share who we were, and so many people that wanted to affect the narrative in a certain way. Like the fact that I can't advocate for my rights in the context of identifying Israel as the state aggressor against Palestinians. Otherwise, that could get me in legal trouble with the state of Texas.
I realize I'm in Texas and I feel so detached from a Palestinian identity, and I feel so alienated because of 73 years now of colonization. It really shaped how I view my position in Texas. It viewed my position to the different laws that exist in Texas, and that challenging laws later, anti-BDS laws, the codification of IRA at universities, is
The codification of what?
the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism, which seeks to mischaracterize rightful pro-Palestine protests and organizing with anti-Semitism. This, challenging these things which permeate, elected spaces generally, but specifically in Texas, is my responsibility as a Palestinian. And I guess growing up in Texas actually shaped my Palestinian identity, because I'm condemned to hope, I'm condemned to take action. Because being Palestinian in Texas specifically means that I have a political responsibility that goes beyond just a cultural relationship. But I have a political responsibility that demands that because I'm Palestinian, I challenge these things that exist in Texas, because I understand that me being here is a result of colonization, and these laws exist to sustain said colonization.
I got invited to do a panel at Trinity University in September, and it was just after Texas had passed the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates anti-Zionist advocacy work and the like with anti-Semitism, which is completely just not true. But these are things that have been adopted by the state of Texas that put people like me doing this work publicly at risk. And it's things like that just go under the radar because of the normalization of Zionism here.
They gave me this addendum because a law was passed in the summer prior about no one's allowed to boycott Israel, and anyone works with the state and has a contract with the state of Texas, they have to sign the clause saying you will not boycott, or you're currently not boycotting. And so when I refused to sign it, I was fired. And then I sued the state of Texas, and alhamdulillah, the federal judge found it in our favor, that was deemed it to be unconstitutional. It took a whole year. So we filed the lawsuit in 2018 in December, and then we finally got a court date in April, I think, and then the deliberation was in May, so at the end of the school year. So that whole year did not work. And so, which is sad, because a lot of people who needed my service were denied that service, because I work with people of Arabic speaking. Mm-hmm. So anyone who has, their native language is Arabic, we have to, as speech therapists, we have to conduct the evaluation in that native language to make sure it's an actual disorder versus a dialectal difference. Sure. In which you wouldn't treat dialectal difference, that would be something for ESL or something like that. It's not a disorder where you need speech therapy. So you have to distinguish between those two. So a lot of people who usually would rely on me were denied that service because there was no one available, because I'm the only speech therapist, Arabic speech therapist in the area. The year, I have to say, because it came with a lot of work too. It wasn't just filing paperwork, it was a lot of advocating, and because the bill was going to be amended. They realized people are suing and they were not happy with this, and they realized the case was going to be bigger than they expected. So they were in the process of trying to amend it, so they wouldn't get any more people to sue. It takes a lot of work, to try to get a law changed. It's not very easy. Mm-hmm. It took a lot of work, actually, and it was kind of an eye-opener of really how little the politicians really care about any of these laws. It was kind of like, wow, they know they're writing something unconstitutional, and they know that no one will come up and say anything, so they're going to write it anyways, because the only way to exchange it is to sue. And who has time to do that? Who has the money to do that? So it was really kind of egregious, the whole idea what they do, but it was a wide opener to see how the things works in the government. And we were able to, when they had amended the law, even though the federal judge of Texas, when he ruled in our favor, deemed it unamendable and unconstitutional, they still did amend it afterwards, the same thing. And they did not change things except people who are impacted. It wasn't individual contractors, but now it was companies with 10 or more employees, or 100,000 income annually or more. So that's the only thing they changed from it, which means it's still the same law. But we were, with the amended law, at least, I think we had a few number of votes that voted against it. Not against it, no, I gotta correct that. It wasn't against it, they abstained, which I'm like, what does that even mean? Basically that they're cowards. They don't want to say no because it's gonna look bad for them. And that's what it means, really. It's like, even though all the work I went through and talking to all of them, and I felt like they supported me, like in front of me when they were talking to me, like, we understand, and yes, it's, so-and-so, and we're going to support you with this. When it came to the voting time, no one voted no. It was just abstained, which means the law still passed, because abstaining means basically it's a yes, because you're not going against it. And so that was just very disturbing that they rather compromise their morality in order to keep their seat. And that's what really a lot of these politicians end up doing. And that's what they end up doing. And so the other one passed the amended version now. No, it's been actually an interesting experience, I have to say. It was, and then, it's definitely didn't expect it to be such a big hype and everything. I thought it was going to be just something quiet, it's in the state of Texas, you go to court, and that's it. Right. But didn't realize when you work with CARE, that, so I'm waiting for the big, reveal of the case you're talking about in Houston, because I'm expecting it to be a huge thing.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, I learned how maybe play the game, avoid conflicts, and that's what I always try to do. Just live your life, avoid the conflicts and whatever. Till this issue with the city of Houston telling me, shove it in basically in my face, saying you need to sign this deal that you cannot boycott Israel. It's like, who the heck are you to tell me that? And I wrote back to the city and told them, I consider Israel as apartheid. They occupy my homeland. And who the heck are you basically to tell me not to boycott it? It's my right as an American, and it's against my constitutional right, and it's against international law to ask me what you're asking. So that's why we have the case in court now. So when they sent me the contract and I refused to sign it and responded to them, they responded to me saying, you're withdrawing from the contract, you just don't want to work with the city of Houston. I said, no, I want to work with the city of Houston, I just need that paragraph taken out. That's all I'm asking for. So don't put it on me that I don't want to work with the city. That's why the attorneys did that injunction with the court, that to keep that option basically open till this issue is resolved. Then I will decide if I want to sign or not sign. It's just legal attorney work, but it was not. I didn't ask for it or whatever. Even the city attorney, he wanted this thing resolved. He's not taking any animosity against us as a company. He understands where we're coming from, and basically he doesn't think it's right, but he said, my hands are tied, I cannot do anything about it. It's the state of Texas putting this on us, but it still has to be taken care of with the city, with the state. That's why the suit is against the Attorney General of state of Texas and the Attorney General.
I think Palestinians in general who are living outside of Palestine can probably say the same thing. I feel like it's hard to say that anywhere is home. Like, it's hard to feel welcome and completely at home anywhere. Especially for me, like, I think I've subconsciously felt that my whole life, because I know I'm an American citizen living in Germany, so you feel like you're definitely not German enough for the Germans, and when you move back to America, you're like not American enough for the Americans. But then when you go back to other countries in the Middle East, like Jordan, I'm not Jordanian. It's like you're not Middle Eastern enough for the Middle Easterns. So I think in the meantime, I just try to find comfort in being uncomfortable with like where I am. Like I try to find things that tie me back to my roots as a Palestinian, especially living in Texas, knowing I was in Germany and other places. So yeah, I think just tying myself back to my roots always is what keeps me feeling okay.
I really feel most Palestinian when I'm organizing. We're organizing our diaspora, who are now going to be second generation away from our homeland, And it's so easy for that to like sort of be like internalized as just being a ethnic or national identity. But seeing Palestinian youth with the self-initiative to organize and to really build this movement, that's when I feel most Palestinian. And then, you know what, kanafe, odebke, like, I promise, like, kanafe tastes so much better after a divestment resolution.
Something that I think is interesting about, like, I guess, like, my journey through, like, organizing and, like, in college and everything is organizing for Palestine, like, helped bring me back to Islam as well. And I think that's just, like, an interesting connection that I think about a lot. Like, Islam was, like, pulling me more towards organizing whenever I was just, like, you know, I guess, like, getting a little burnt out or just, like, you know, not wanting, you know, not feeling motivated enough to do it. Like, I felt like my religion was the one pulling me back to organizing. And so it's just, like, always this, like, cycle of, like, chasing one another. Yeah. I think it's just, like, a cool connection.
Something that actually I kind of had to teach myself. My teta's Lebanese. So she does cross-stitch, or she did cross-stitch, Allah yarhamha, but it was like Lebanese cross-stitch, which is a little bit different, so they don't have the same motifs.
What is tetris for people who don't know?
Oh, it is embroidery. So it's a particular kind of, well, it can be different things. Mostly it's cross-stitch, counter cross-stitch, like what we have here. In diaspora and exile, we have, I guess, a more nostalgic relationship to it, a more like philosophical relationship to it, because it's a way of connecting ourselves to our home, our identities.
Cooking, like food, and sharing food with friends, and talking about, you know, foods that I grew up eating, and even going to like a wedding and wearing a thobe, a Palestinian thobe, it makes me feel tied to my culture. So just little things here and there.
I mean, I've never actually been to an American wedding. Like, I've seen them on movies, and it's just, you know, some people sitting at tables. There are some speeches, a toast, and then I don't know, what do they do after that? Go home, eat dinner or something? I really don't know. But, you know, whereas a Palestinian wedding, from the moment you go in to the moment you leave, it's loud music, people celebrating, dancing, they got the fun tablas going on. And, you know, I didn't really appreciate it when I was a kid. I was like, yeah, I don't like this music. The drums are too loud. The people are stomping on the floor too hard when they're dancing. But, you know, as you get older, you know, become more diverse, or at least you're supposed to. And you just start to appreciate that stuff more.
You know, it's a form of expression and a form of love, and I can, like, shortcut a lot of, like, expressing to people. I love to feed non-Palestinians, Palestinian cooking. You know, it's like you don't have to explain much if you're eating and enjoying. And, you know, I think across all cultures, and, you know, food is kind of how you express yourself and you show love to people. But I think it also is tied in with, I couldn't really connect with my family on a religious level. I couldn't connect with my family on a linguistic level effectively, but I could on the food side of things. The dish that we made, this is a recipe that my aunt, who's Palestinian, she makes. I actually think it's originally a Syrian recipe. It's called yalanji, which is, you know, essentially rolled grape leaves. I'm pescatarian, so I don't eat meat. So I like this recipe more than what traditionally Palestinians would make, dawali, which would have meat, tomatoes, sometimes like lemon. And does your family make it with lemon and potatoes? Yes. Yeah. So this is yalanji. It's a vegetarian version of that. So it's really citrusy, really lemony, and it's vegetarian. So it's my favorite.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
I would love to know so much more about, like, the past of, like, from, like, Burqa to Nablus on, like, a grander, to Palestine, to every, like, I want to know so much, because I feel like you just watch it be erased and you're like, someone should be, like, not someone should be doing the work of, because there are beautiful artists out there and great Palestinian poets and writers and creatives that are, like, making it live, not just be Palestine, but everywhere else around.
And I heard Fairuz for the first time. And you know, Sanirja'a Yawman, it's like we will return to our homes. I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, Mom, have you heard this song? And she started crying. Because she hadn't listened to Fairuz in decades. She hadn't listened to Fairuz, like, it's like the Madonna of the Arab world, you know?
Back home and to here in a way, right? Because it makes me love being here. I wish I were in Palestine. I really do.
But there are so many reasons I can't be, but there are also so many reasons that I love my life here. And gardening is a way to connect with the land here in a meaningful way, and to know that, you know, this same earth that produced for us in Palestine can produce the same things here, and we can repeat these same practices by going to the garden to pick squash or fresh tomatoes or peppers, and we can sit around the table and tell the stories that we would about our grandmothers and our grandparents and how we used to laugh doing the same things back in Palestine, right? It's hard not to feel like you're there when you're doing those same things. And so gardening has really been one of the biggest ways that I've been able to just appreciate my life a lot more and not take things for granted, but also connect to Palestine in ways that I haven't been able to before, right? Because we can do the protests, and we do, right? And those matter. And we can get loud, and we can go out and we can talk to people, and we do panels, and we have meetings. But it doesn't feel the same, right? It feels like we're intellectualizing it, that we're making it a cause, but it's more than that. It's just who we are, right? It's in those daily practices that make us who we are, and that's when I feel more Palestinian than anything.
Regardless of whether like Texas disappears in 10 minutes from climate change, or like regardless of whether you know, like Palestine actually like becomes entirely entrapped in the state of Israel, it's like it's the idea that we are not going to forfeit this feeling that we know, like this feeling that we hold to be true, even if it's not immediately in front of us always. And it's like and it's like that's something that can come out of nothing. It doesn't require material. We don't need the land. Like, we'd love the land back, please. Like, they're like, yeah, we'll take the land back, but like, we don't need it to keep Palestine alive, and that is what can't be taken from us. That is the thing that I think like Zionists know, and what they fear the most is that they're trying to kill like a feeling. You can't kill a feeling. Like, it's just not possible. They can build concepts to repress it, but there's no stifling that. There's no elimination of like the like love and joy and everything we've been talking about. That is the core of what Palestine is to Palestinians. And you can try and like and delegitimize our bodies. You can maim and kill our bodies. You can do all that, but you can't suppress like our community, and you can't suppress our like love and our generation, our continuous generation of the Palestinian nation, of the Palestinian character, of the Palestinian habitude. It will outlast us all. Even when there is no one left calling themselves a Palestinian, like like the sunrise in Jerusalem on an olive tree, like that's Palestine. And it might not be seen by anyone, but it'll be there.